Welcome back, guys, to the middle of little Willy, little Dibby Riddle to middle Dindle Diddly, and a happy new year. Just had to get that off my chest. Fresh off the press, we've reached a significant milestone by hitting 5k subscribers to the channel last year, and thank you all for the continual support and feedback. It's been a great start to the year, and there's big things to come. In other news, the first poll of the year has been run, and no surprise that FZ was the clear winner. In light of this, we'll be discussing how to create a custom animation for your flipper. Your first try might not be as polished as those in the flipper community, but there's no time like the present to start your own. This is a long one, so buckle up, turn up those speakers, and let's go! Now, this implementation will only cover a Windows operating system implementation and not Mac or Linux. Before we can begin, there are some prerequisites we need to first install to make sure we have in place so we can begin our own custom implementation of the animations. First, we need to head over to the Windows Store and install the app installer. And that'll be this application right here. If you don't already have this, you will thank me later. With Windows App Installer, you can install a Universal Windows Platform or UWP apps from a variety of sources, including Microsoft Store, local network shares, or third-party websites. The app also allows you to uninstall UWP apps, view the installation status of the app, repair or reset apps if they are not functioning correctly within the command line, and so much more. Now, once you've downloaded Windows App Installer and you head over to command line, this is where you can take full advantage of this application. With that installed, you now have the ability to type win-git within command line. Now, as you can see here, you have various flags available to you. You have a search, install, source, list, upgrade, uninstall, hash. Now, essentially, this command line tool enables you as an admin or developer to discover, install, upgrade, remove, configure applications to will. So you don't need to go around the net to search for them. So it's equivalent to what Linux users already use when it comes to apt-get. Now you have a win-git. So if I say win-git and we say search for an application, say we say Notepad++, this will search every database available to it and find the relevant version or application under that search parameter. So you can see here, Notepad++ is available and what version is available and the source of it. Now that was just a search capability. So if we replace the parameter search with install, you can really get a sense of how powerful this is. So now I'm telling it to install Notepad++. And as you can see, it's completed this installation of Notepad++, and now Notepad++ should be available to us. And there it is. I didn't have it before, and now I have Notepad++. We will leverage this later on when it comes to our animation installations, and we're going to be using Git for that. But for now, have this installed and thank me later. The next application on our hit list is the GitHub Windows desktop application. So for those unfamiliar with Git already, it's essentially a repository where you can create projects, collaborate with other developers or users on projects, and synchronize their work or your own to the GitHub servers. What I like about the GitHub Windows application is that it gives you a graphical user interface where you can view and manage your repositories, as well as work with many tools available to the Git environment using Windows command line. Alright, the next phase to our animation journey is to select an animation to display on the flipper. Now keep in mind, it must be able to scale down to the size of the flipper's screen, which is 128 by 64 pixels. So a good place for me for finding looping animations to meet these criteria is Giphy. So this should provide us with a good starting point to create a seamless, visually appealing animation for our Flipper Zero to start off with. And as you advance and get more comfortable with this process, you can do your own kind of stop animations and get more customized with different features using either Illustrator, Photoshop, or any graphical design software that can facilitate those kind of features. So we can begin by finding an animation that we want to apply to our flipper. I'm going to head over to an anime that I love, which is Death Note. And then we can pick Ryuzaki. And that's quite a good loop actually already. I'll pick the black and white one, and note that color does not work well with the flipper's LCD screen. Just because the nature of its black and white pixels, and it doesn't apply any color. So you will need to have a black and white image for your animation. So if we save this, right, now that we saved our L animation, what we next need to do is scale that Giphy down to size. Now, a good way to quickly view your Giphy is to just transfer it into a web browser, and you can just view it that way. So our first website we're going to visit is easygif.com. This is a great one that I use regularly for these kinds of activities. So if we just drag our LGIF in there, and now we can scale it down to the size we require, which was 128 by 64. Resize that. Now it's been resized, we can save it. All right, that's one phase done. Our next phase is to now split this animation into various frames. So if we use the split feature within EasyGIF once more, and now you can see why it's such a good website, because it gives you all these functions that you'd have to pay for in third-party applications. Upload that, and now we can split it into various frames. So you can see here, here's all the frames for that animation. Now we download that. All right, now we have our individual frames. We have a number of tasks that we have to complete to get this legible and ready for animation for the flipper. Our first port of call is to rename these frames. Our second port of call is to convert them into PNG files, because as you can see at the minute, they're .gifs. So let's first convert them. So if we head over to anyconv, which will convert our current GIFs to PNG files. Now I can put all of that in there and hit convert. We need to keep the numerical order in check, so it needs to be from 0 all the way to the last frame, and I'll show you why in a second. All right, now we have our converted GIFs to PNG files. We're slowly getting to our end goal. So now we have our next task to perform. We need to numerically name these frames in order, but in a legible format that Flipper can read these frames in. So the format this reads in is frame_number. So if we try to just rename this, and you're going to see the problem in 1 second. So if I say frame_number, which will start from 0, here you can see they've all been renamed. But now you have these trailing parentheses with 1, 2, 3, and we can't work with that. So you'd go in and rename these one by one, which if you had 100 frames, for example, that would be a very laborious task. So let's undo that. The ACE is going to help you with some PowerShell script. We open up a PowerShell window. We set -location. Put in quotes. Take the destination, put that inside, close the quotes. Now you're within the destination. We clean that up. Now, the command we're going to use is dir, which is going to be the current directory we're in, then star.png, which is all the PNG files within this directory. Then we're going to pipe that with a for each. We're going to count each instance of the object. And then we're going to begin. Put some parentheses, and then we're going to declare a variable of count equals 0. And then close the parentheses there. Count equals 0. Close the parenthesis. Now we can open a process. Now we can open a process, and then we're going to rename each item within that process $_, and now we can give it a new name variable. Now what we want to give that new name is frame, of course, _, and then we're going to inject that count variable inside that code as a PNG. Close the quotation, don't forget the semicolon. Now hit the count variable once more and ++ to increment it every time, and we close parentheses. Now if that's been done correctly, we can observe above what happens to the naming structure once I run the code in 3, 2, 1. And that's it. It's done. As you can see above, the naming structure is completely the way we need it without you having to go through frame by frame to rename them. And you can thank me later for that one. We can load our GitHub desktop application, and now we need to clone the repository from the official Flipper Zero firmware into our GitHub for desktop. This will allow us to access the code and make the necessary changes or modifications to the firmware so we can customize the animation as we see fit. Think of this stage as using the official firmware as a stable base for your custom animation to be built in. We can then incorporate our own animations into the firmware later on. If this is unclear now, it will become more clearer as we progress through the process. So if we head over to the official repo for Flipper Zero and we take the clone HTTPS link, and then we go to clone repository from the internet, direct URL, paste that in there, make sure you put it in a location you can access, and clone. Now this will take a few minutes for it to clone because there's loads of files to clone, but depending on your internet speed, it shouldn't take that long. Alright, now that's complete, we can head over to the directory that is installed in. And now we can head over to assets. Now you're going to have to take note of some of these directories, but the main directory the animations reside in is in Dolphin, and then external. Now here's all the defaults official firmware's animation. So if I were to select one, you may even see it already. There's the flipper in the waves. We have sad flipper. And a good way to look at these animations in real time is to just select one of them and just skip through it, and then you can see what it actually looks like. Also take note, inside these, like I told you before, we have frame _0 all the way to the last frame. We also have this file called meta.txt, and this is going to be quite important to us. And I'm going to break this down in 1 second. First, let us create a new folder within this directory, and we shall just call it L. Now we have our L folder. We need to take all of our frames that we made previously, and now we can paste it into this L folder. There we have it. Now what we want to do here is just nick one of these metas for now, and we'll paste it into our L folder. Now let's open up this meta and actually see what we're dealing with. Now to create a custom animation for the flipper, you need to either edit or create this file called meta.txt. The file will include a number of parameters that determine how the animation will play, including the width and height in pixels, the number of passive frames, the frame rate, and the duration. And that could be here. This is the width, this is the height, here's the passive frames, and here's the duration and the frame rate. The frame rate determines the speed at which the animation will play, but it's important to keep in mind that the LCD has a refresh rate, and if the frame rate is set too high, the animation may appear blurry. Starting with the width and height we discussed a second ago, the 128 by 64 represents the entire screen size of the Flipper Zero. Next we have passive frames and active frames. Now as this is a beginner video for the animation, we're only going to talk about passive frames and we'll skip any reference to active frames between active cycles and active cooldown. Just for your own reference, and you may be curious as to what they do, the active frames are a type of animation frame that are used within the Flipper Zero, and you can see them if you scroll through the default animations that's available. There are a set of frames that are played in a loop with a specific number of cycles and cooldown periods between each cycle. The active frames are triggered by certain actions or events, such as pressing a button or reaching a certain level after achieving a task within the flipper. The active frames are used to add interactivity or dynamic behavior to the Flipper Zero and can be used to create animations that respond to user input or any device environment variables that you might set later. This is beyond the scope, as I mentioned, because this is just an introductory video and I'm still wrapping my head around the best way to implement these active frames and active cooldowns. So as mentioned, we're not discussing the active frames and active cooldowns, but instead we're going to focus on the frame rate and duration, which determines how quickly the image will play and how long the animation will loop for on the screen. The frame rate is measured in the number of images per second, and the faster the number, the faster the images will play. However, it's important to consider the refresh rate of the LCD as mentioned earlier, because if you set this too high, there's no point, it's just going to be too blurry. The duration is the length of time the animation will play in a loop on the screen. To ensure that the animation plays correctly, make sure you start from frame 0 and to correctly reflect the total number of frames. So we have 14 in our case. So let's start editing this. So we have passive frames. So we can go to 1, 2. In frame order, we can have 1, 2, 3, all the way to 14. All right, so we have active frames. We said we're going to set that to 0. Active cooldown, we can set that to 0. Duration is 600, so almost basically 4 seconds. Frame rate, remember that's how fast it's going to play. I'm going to say about a 6 should be enough. I think the maximum is 8 to 10, but I haven't tested them all fully. Active cooldowns, 0. So passive frames, those are the number of passive frames that we're going to have. As you can see here, we have 14. So here we should put 15, as 0 will count as a number in this set. Here we have bubble slots. So bubble slots are basically the speech bubbles that appear on the screen during your animation. We can have this in if we want to keep one just to test it. I can keep one in, so we just keep 1. So we'll keep it as 0 actually, and then delete that one. What you want to make note of here is the axis. So you can see here, this sits at a 78 by 16 axis. Now, if you think of the screen size, as I mentioned, is the 128 by 64, you got to see where the x-axis lines up for 128 and 64 and the y. And that will measure on the screen where that bubble is going to appear. So you got a little plot grafting to do before you can actually know where this is going to measure up on the screen. But considering this is just for testing to show you it in principle, we can say it's 2023. Alignment height and alignment vertical, we say it's on the bottom, we can say it's right bottom. And the start frame, when do you want this bubble to appear on? So frame 1, and it can end on, say, frame 8. And now we can save that, so I'm happy with that. So now we have the frames, and now we have the meta file according to these frames. Good stuff. So our next step, we can look into this manifest. Now, again, don't be afraid of what you see here. The Ace is going to explain it piece by piece. So here we have the file type and version. You can leave that as default. This is what's interesting. So we have the name. This name reflects a folder name that's on this left that contains your animations. So essentially, this is a playlist for the Flipper's animations that determines which animations will play in which order and under which certain conditions. It checks a number of parameters actually, including the minimum and maximum butt hurt. So what the hell is a butt hurt, you might ask? This measures the Flipper's happiness or sadness rating actually. And the minimum and maximum levels are set as such for your level on the Flipper. Next we have the weight. And this is the frequency in which the animation will play. So if you have a higher weight, it has more prominence to play over other ones that have a less wait time. So considering this is just a single animation tutorial we're going to look at, we can delete all of these except one. And that'll be the one we have, and we'll call that L. And then we can have a weight of 8 as a maximum value in this case. So the only animation is going to play is this one, and the only animation on the list is this one. So either way, it's going to play. We can save that. Close that. Now, a small caveat to note at this point is that if you run your animation when we do get to that stage and you see the Flipper sitting on the couch watching TV, this is not a good sign. This is a fail-safe that will never go away unless you completely recompile your own firmware onto the Flipper Zero. As a prospective animator, you don't want to see this animation, and every time you do see it, you're going to get very frustrated, as it means you did something wrong along the way, either within the manifest or within the meta or within the frames themselves. Something went wrong and it's playing that as default. So Flipper on couch bad. Now our next task is to try and compile our animation using the Flipper Zero firmware as the base. But before we do that, we need to actually call upon this file, this FBT file. Now the FBT file stands for the Flipper boot table, and it's a file used on the Flipper Zero that contains a bootloader and other system files that is needed to start the Flipper Zero and load the OS. But we can leverage it to do other things, including loading our own custom animation. So the first thing you want to do is be within the top directory. That's quite important because we have to call upon this file with the command we're going to use. So if we take this location, then we do again set location, and then some quotes, close the quotes, clear that. Now we're in the location that we want. Now once we're in that directory, we first need to summon the winget command we previously mentioned at the beginning and install git as a resource. So we will run winget --id get.get --e, and the source will be git. So if you run this command, I'll leave it on the screen for a moment for you to take it down, and then we hit enter. The next command I want you to use summons the use of the FBT I told you earlier to look at under the icons proto dolphin internal, which is a folder, and then dolphin external, and then resources is where our output's going to reside. So if we can look at this directory where it says assets and resources, and that's under this Dolphin external, we can keep an eye on this as we run this command to show you what's actually going to happen. So we run this, and now we keep an eye on the right folder structure. Here, you could just see here, a new folder appeared called Dolphin. Now this Dolphin looks at the external, which contained all the animations we looked at before, and then it's going to recompile it into these assets that we can later use for our own animations in Flipper Zero. Now yours might not be as quick as mine because I've already run this, but just keep with it. If you do get a manifest error, you may need to look into the meta that we previously looked at, or you may need to look at the file structures that we named the images by. Something somewhere it went wrong, and you're going to have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to find where the error may be. So if we look into this Dolphin folder now, bam, you can see a manifest here, and that's the one we set earlier. But more importantly, you can see our frames are here in this BM format, and that's the format that the Flipper can read in. And then we have our meta that we set previously. Now you can change this meta on the fly because this meta is now bound to this BM structure that we have here. So if you want to change, say, these bubble slots or the locations of them, you can just change that and re-upload it. If you reach this phase, congratulations and hats off to you. Now the easy task of just transferring this over to the Flipper is at hand to view our custom animation. So now if you bring up Q Flipper, now we have our boys Talking Sasquatch's animation up, the Matrix Rain. Fantastic stuff. We can go into the file manager, SD card. Now we go into Dolphin. And now we look for the current manifest, which is here. We can delete that because we have our own one to replace it with. And now we can drag our custom animation over to this directory. Now that's loaded up, the moment of truth awaits us. So if we load this up and now we can hold down the middle button, bearing in mind I'm running at the moment Rogue Master, for the simple fact that you can flip through animations just by holding the middle button and not having to hold the back button and the left trigger just to restart it. That's just all long. So if we hold down the middle button, bam, we have Ryozaki on the screen. And if we just minimize it so it looks a bit cleaner, there you have it. Congratulations if you were able to follow all of those steps and have Ryozaki or whoever you have appearing for you on the screen. So we've reached the end of this episode, and first of all I want to thank you for taking the time to even try and attempt your first animation and for supporting the Hacking Time team and channel thus far. Next, I want to thank Talking Sasquatch for his advice, encouragement and pointing me in the right direction before I even attempted to make my first animation. If you haven't already, make sure you check out his YouTube channel and his Git repository where he's developing his own Flipper firmware, which has amazing community support, as well as some fantastic work he's doing in the animation space. Remember to leave positive comments below, and if you can, join the Hacking Time Discord and stay safe in the cyberspace. Peace out.